Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Xtreme Studios on location in Toronto, Canada. I have the young 20-something Professor Pixel joining me as we continue our review of Season 1, Forever Knight, the 800-year-old vampire detective Nick Knight who wants to repay society for his sins. Therefore, he doesn't want to really kill people and works the graveyard shift. And, of course, I am here just west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pine Hills Palace, not up there where it's really fucking cold up in Canada, but that's where the show takes place. And we have an episode here, episode 19, If Looks Could Kill, that actually finally, I think as we're starting to round down Pixel into these last few episodes of season 1, is taking us into the realm of what we want the show to sometimes be about, and that's really about him as a vampire, and if they're going to set things up supernaturally rather than just flashbacks of, Lacroix and Jeanette. This, to me, is a good episode. It's interesting because it's about women who have a pusher that has them on what you would think would be like diet pills, like speed, basically, caffeine, whatever you want to call it, to stay looking young, because that was a theme with working out, pushing people to do that. And that still exists today, except for there's a trick to it, a little twist, which we'll get into in a moment. But I gotta say, I like the opening here because we get a beautiful woman trying to buy some stuff, and we got her putting a lipstick on, just looking all kind of cute and sexy and womanly. And she's shopping at a mall, and she just kind of like starts freaking out. And then she whacks the lady trying to sell her the stuff, saying, I have to work so hard at this and all that. And the security guy whacks her, which is the only time you'll see a security guy putting anybody down ever. So I thought this was a cute little opening. Okay, we got something here. A woman that's beautiful that really doesn't need makeup is she shoplifting? Is she having a psychotic break? And she gets whacked, and she's bitching and complaining about how hard it takes. I like how we're diving into a female issue. What's your take on this setup?
You
don't like it. It's indifferent to it. I can tell by that.
Yeah. So the episode, when it goes ahead and starts, and you do have this woman that's freaking out about makeup and how hard it is, and she ends up trying to whack her because
I love it.
It's all very, very quick. You get right into the action, and then she gets shot by the security guard. But I don't know. I guess this episode wasn't working as well as certain other ones. Because when you do have Skanky get on the scene, and then Nick and Natalie, and they're all talking about, okay, well, that model there is like 15, right? That's how they sell you on youth. And look at this woman, so beautiful. Why would she do this? And you have Nick, who the most interesting part about this is the flashback episode.
You think so?
Flashback parts.
Okay.
Because you have Nick as he's thinking about the youth and the beauty and what could drive this woman to do such a thing. And they go around and they have to start telling like her roommate and her employer. He has flashbacks of a woman that he saw as beautiful. But she was aging, the Duchess. She was seeing the end of her life, and she was smart enough to know that Nick was something more.
Yeah, I mean, I will agree with you. There's a lot of potential where this could have been a beefier part. Sometimes I don't have a problem if the B story is stronger than the lead. I really don't. Sometimes if you go back and forth, that's kind of cool. I think here, though, the whole idea of women having to do something for beauty is interesting, because that lays into the whole idea of what happens when you get sexually aroused as a female. You get what's called the sex flush. That's why rouge, which means red, your cheeks get red because of the swelling of the capillaries, all these things that are going on in your body and all that. So when you have that down, that's what resonates to a man on a deeper primeval level in his brain, whether you're a Christian or not, or where that's the physiology from the animal perspective, that's never going to go away. And so I thought it was interesting because, again, going from the 80s, which is the height of like enthusiasm and consumerism, starting to die off in the 90s a little bit, to see them at a shopping mall, which we haven't had yet, a beautiful woman, and what she's doing, she obviously can afford. It's not like a problem. So it's like, why is she shoplifting? But then when she freaks out and pulls out the gun, you're like, okay, that's atypical. But the female part of it's true, and the Baroness is not 19 anymore, but she is very good looking. They definitely could have had a few more scenes to flesh that out and made that a little bit lean into like teased a little bit more about maybe her wanting to just sexually be with Nick rather than just kind of mentioning it sort of whatever, and then blackmails him basically. I just didn't feel like she had the leverage to do that yet. I would like to see a little bit more angst like we did in the last episode where, you can tell he's angsty because he's wearing the pirate white shirt while painting a really horrible picture, really French of him and all that. Here it's just, okay, it's there. So I agree with you. I think that's a nice little backstory to it. And then, of course, Natalie's freaking out a little bit, too, because she's thinking she's not getting younger. And we had an episode with her earlier in the season where she's like, well, I'm not getting younger, where she goes to meet the really nice guy who ends up not being so nice and everything, too. So it's nice to see him and Natalie be a little bit more chummy, too. But it's interesting. I thought they could have leaned into it a little bit more, just all phases, the backstory, the sexiness of it and everything, too. But not bad. What was it about the backstory that made it so much better than the A story?
So remember how we had an episode just a little while ago with the kid, and Nick was remembering pretty much taking in this youthful scamp, and he wasn't very enjoyable. We hated the kid, but the setting is always nice. It's always interesting. It goes ahead and draws us in and keeps us in that old world that he has lived. I liked that coming here, and I was more engaged with the Duchess herself. I think she was playing her part of, the Duke is, he's not being as discreet as he once was, and Nick is like, well, he's still very discreet. Most people don't even know. She was intriguing, and it's going to come back later in the episode when we get towards the end. But again, like most of the modern stuff of this episode just wasn't doing it for me.
Well, part of it, I think, is a bit of a period piece in the sense that you had gyms that were a lot like that. Sometimes they called them spas, but the thing is all the trails leading to the spa because that's the connection that some of these people that are dying have, and so they're doing the toxicology reports. Natalie sees, hey, she calls him in here, man. When I looked at this body, it was normal, like a woman who's like 30 or whatever, and now it's a woman that looks old. What's going on? And so the lady that is the boss of the company they're running to, because it's very female centric, the business, and most women there are working out. It's not like how most gyms are, honestly, but the way they dressed was, you get an interesting scene when they're in there, but it's like they cut from him talking to her in that tone of voice that works like this. That's very effective for Nick and allows him to get what he wants out of women. You get a woman that's working out, and we're like, okay, who's this? And she's like doing chest flies or whatever. And you got this big jack trainer like that, and he's doing the old, you can do one more. And she's like, no, I'm done or whatever. And he's physically grabbing her, and then he takes her, and he literally, this was a little weird. He picks her up, and he basically carries her over to the adductor machine, shoves her on it to basically do it. And what is this girl doing? I thought this is probably not what they wanted to do in the episode. It was very outstanding, and that it surprised me. She takes a hand weight, just clocks the guy, and leaves. But then we see she has an episode too. And so I thought that was kind of interesting as well, because you're like, I don't know what's going on. Obviously, it's a front for something. What's going on? Nick's going to sweet talk his way into getting information off the lead person. That definitely is going to happen. But that was all stuff that seemed reasonable for the 80s, because, you had a bit of a gym culture going over in the 80s. I think it kind of died off in the 90s. And it was about looking good. It was about, hey, that's where you'd go to get your steroids, your drugs, your speed to make your metabolism go faster, and everything else there too. So I got no problem with that. And I like how in one episode we talked about the late night TV talk shows. That was early in the season. Last episode was the addiction one. This one here is about health clubs. And so I like how each episode we go, it's the health club episode. Oh, okay, that one in a gym where the girl whacks the guy with the hand weight. That's kind of cool. But really, it is about the backstory with the Baroness, don't you think?
Yes. No. I get how it relates. I'm not going ahead and discounting that. It's just, it wasn't as intriguing as the actual background that we were dealing with. I was more engaged in those scenes, but whenever we went ahead and went back to the modern times, and you're dealing with it. It just wasn't selling it as much for me. And that's just a personal thing. It's not me saying that I think that this episode is bad. It's actually quite a bit better than other episodes that I have gone ahead and forgiven more. I wasn't drawn in. So even with the rapid aging of the victims.
Yeah, it's interesting because they bring up something that, well, two things. One thing that does happen here that's interesting now that we were starting to get a little bit more backstories, because it's not necessarily in every episode, they don't lean into it, is I always liked it when every episode, like early on, we got like the Joan of Arc thing. I'm like, okay, that's cool. He was around at that time. Then another time they're running from people, chasing them, hunting them down on horseback, right? So that was a different time period. Another time they were in, was it the Civil War? Okay, so it's kind of cool because when I think of him, that reminds me that he's 800 years old. I don't see him being 800 because he looks like he's 30, 35, right? But seeing these backstories that they do constantly remind me as a viewer that there's more to him. Of course, it's an emphasis on this story's already happened before in the past. How can he make connections? How can he right or wrong morally, internally with himself if it's a struggle like last episode? And this one, not so much. But the Baroness thing, I thought there could be a bit more thing about, an older woman using her station in life like the Baroness to manipulate a younger man, because that's obviously the middle-aged version of a cougar, right? So obviously that's kind of celebrated now rather than how it might have been, say, a generation or two ago. But the whole thing with the women having to keep this up and finding out who the dealer is, well, what's the only thing that can keep a woman youthful, sir?
Well,
from the episode, what's the answer?
She's a plastic surgery. That's
the front, but the blood of the vampire. Because remember, the pusher is the whatever that it's implied that Natalie's the one that turned the Baroness, and this would be her. I mean,
So Natalie does go. Not Natalie. Sorry. The what is Jeanette? Jeanette goes ahead and turns her. Oh, she was using her own blood and injecting them into the victims. That's what was aging them.
It was them not getting their fix. Like when you crash coming off of something like that, all of a sudden, you go through the shakes. There's a real famous scene from the French Connection with Gene Hackman going through withdrawal, the second one, I believe it is. And so everyone's like, man, that's gross. That doesn't happen. And everybody on drugs I've known is like, oh no, it's exactly what it's like. So some people say you like prematurely aged. And that was kind of like the whole point to it. I don't think it's really written very well, which is kind of bugs me because it seems like the last episode where we thought it was a lackluster third act or reveal, I feel like it's that way here now too, kind of, right?
So the thing is, when it is revealed that, oh yes, Nick, it's what we do. Oh no, I'm not turning them. That's not what I'm doing. Because that's what she says. That she's not biting them. She's not turning them into her victims and giving them the gift of the vampire. I guess that I must have missed something in the text that she was going ahead and saying in the dialogue, because I was trying to still understand at the end what was it that was turning them.
Well, that was the whole point. That's the way it comes across to me. And so we don't really know why he's, for lack of a better term, an aristocrat, because the way he's dressed with the Baroness, he's obviously somebody in those social circles at the time that would not be considered a peasant. So they could have leaned into that. We know that he paints. We know that he likes the arts. He gets moody on the piano and stuff. So maybe over the years, his mind went more towards art. And so maybe he was an artist for hundreds of years, and we see him in different places or whatever, and that's the thing with his craft. But we're not led to believe the way they've written this show so far that that's kind of what he is. He just happens to be a vampire, and so maybe he's just travels in those circles. Like say if we got an episode where he met Bram Stoker or Percy Shelley or somebody at that time, or was around with the people in France sitting at a diner, coming up with ideas for the state and everything, that was the birthplace of communism or anything else. They haven't been doing that much with Nick Knight, which again, to your point, sometimes that B thing can be more interesting, at least from the motivation of who he is as a character, not necessarily because he's a vampire. But I got to tell you, I don't know that I feel any majorly different in this episode than I did in the first few about how he's a vampire and what the rules are, because we saw him do the hypnotic suggestion, I think in the first episode. I think we did it in another one, but the idea was they have to be open to it, kind of, in a way. It's more of we just see him do a little bit of flying, a little bit of so maybe a quick speed or strength thing, or tossing people around, and that's about it. Because the detective part of this thing was a little wimpy, where the girl gets thrown in jail and she needs her doctor, and that's the kind of the cue for, wait a minute, this isn't what it seems, I need this doctor. And then of course the guard had the auto suggestion put on him and everything, so it feels a little rushed and forced, the last act. I will agree with you on that, but we get more Jeanette in here, and we get her actually kind of talking, not so much as like this 17-year-old fucking me kind of girl or whatever, or clever or like that. She's actually seeming like a mature person, telling Nick about people and her human foibles and stuff. And she's telling about the human's enthusiasm when we don't have it, and he's like, well, maybe they're more enjoyable than we are. Just that whole angst that you're supposed to have. I was like, okay, at least she's interesting in this episode, because Nick, let's be honest, I'm starting to get bored of you, bro, because I like your little angsty moments that you have and everything too. I like it when you were in Skank, you're doing the buddy cop kind of routine. I even don't mind this fake on off again romance with the other doctor, but right now we're just getting him being kind of one-dimensional in a way. And I just thought, for 800 years old, and I've said this before, I expect you to have a little bit more wisdom of the ages. Right now you're not displaying it, sir. So probably the fault of the episode, because again, it's another decent one with potential good backstory, and maybe it leads into a storyline of why Jeanette does what she does, and they have issues between them, that they're not a couple. I don't know, because they're obviously very fond of each other and affectionate, and I can't say brother sister because it sounds kind of sexually gross, but
they are.
He definitely doesn't want to make it seem like they're lovers, and maybe you're just fuck buddies because you've known each other 100 years, and the vampire world is a small one because they haven't really fleshed it out, right? Other than the Raven is the place where it's for humans and non-humans, as I think it was described to us too. But yeah, I'll agree with you. Decent episode, backstory a lot better than the main story. Not as strong as last week's episode, in my opinion. A bunch of beautiful women in here. I like the theme of it. I like women and violence. So good on you for having that in here too. And also having a woman be basically your junkie. That's how I have to look at it. Otherwise it'll just upset me. Final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Yeah, this episode could have been stronger. I like the historical factor. I always love dipping into the past, and I think the character of the Duchess was far more interesting than the episode gave.
I will say the final scene, there's one I really liked and one I didn't. The next to final scene, the one where Skanky's there, and it's obviously him and Natalie are having a yuck about how he basically made him forget. And then all the cops are kind of really looking at me, hey, you're right there, and how could you completely forget? And it's like, I know it's stupid, but I can't believe I just forgot who blah, 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 right? Lame. That was just a way to get the writing, and that kind of pissed me off. But then I actually really liked the last scene where he's walking with the woman, and she's aged, and she's got the long white hair and everything too. She's beautiful, and he just gives her a kiss, and he's like, okay, I'll walk you home. And the way he can do it, that's so disarming. And finally, what makes this scene great isn't just that it's okay and cute. He's finally back to wearing his turtleneck, which had been void in the past couple episodes. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If Looks Could Kill, Season 1, Episode 19 of Forever Night. Check that out, as well as our other episodes. For Professor Pix and everybody involved here at the Xtreme Movie Show, good night now.
This was not a Dan Curtis production. Even